Uh, Excuse me, Joe, can you take down the screen?
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, should we start? It is 4:05. And we have a nice round number of
Streaming.
555
We're streaming now.
people on, and we're streaming. Okay.
I don't see it.
Sometimes it takes a little bit for it to go from here to Facebook. Okay, so hello everybody and welcome. I'm Joe Lombardo. I'm the coordinator of the United National Anti-War Coalition, UNAC, which is hosting the webinar today. And we are a founding member of the Sanctions Kill Coalition, which is a coalition of many, many groups in the United States. Many of them are represented here today, and we'll be introducing some of the speakers. Some of the groups that are part of it are the International Action Center, the U.S. Peace Council, IFCO Pastors for Peace, Popular Resistance, the December 12th Movement, Code Pink, Black Alliance for Peace, and many others. If you go to our website, sanctionskill.org, you can sign up and join with us. Today we're going to hear from representatives of several governments around the world that are affected by US imposed sanctions. These sanctions are especially egregious during the COVID-19 crisis. They're really war by another name, and they kill many, many people around the world. During this crisis, the US has upped the sanctions on several countries rather than expressing solidarity and trying to help the countries. Part of the sanctions deny many countries medical aid, medical equipment. Other countries, such as Cuba, have done exactly the opposite and expressed solidarity with countries around the world, have sent doctors, and although they're not a rich country like the United States, have done everything they can to try to stay the COVID-19 pandemic in their own country and around the world. So tonight we're going to hear from representatives of a number of these countries. We are being broadcast here with hundreds have logged on already, and on Facebook and on YouTube. Also Free Speech TV and Radio for All. And the recording of this will be on a number of places, and you'll get information on that when after we're done. So I'm going to introduce Sarah Flounders now, who is going to chair the meeting. Sarah is an activist in social justice struggles for decades. She helps coordinate the Sanctions Kill Coalition and also UNAC, is a contributing editor to the Workers' World newspaper, and coordinates the International Action Center. She helped organize many past campaigns against US sanctions and endless wars. I'm going to turn it over to Sarah.
Thank you, Joe. And thank you to everyone who's tuned in and to this very, very strong panel of speakers. We're meeting at a time of great crisis, a global pandemic, an enormous threat with no end in sight. And every rational person knows that the survival of millions depends on a new, higher level of cooperation and planning. And we see the opposite from the US. I'm speaking from New York City area with the highest number of COVID fatalities in the world. And as in every US crisis, hardest hit are people of color. It's clear that the US government is incapable of even defending the population here, a country with the highest level of scientific and technological development. But its resources for years have been spent for a war on the world. And that's the only response. Enormous threat. It's their automatic response. So today we're speaking with countries who have experienced lethal US sanctions as a cause of sickness and malnutrition, death for years. The intensifying economic sanctions, the strangulation tactics on a third of the world's population, 39 countries are now targeted by US sanctions. And every attack comes with an onslaught here in the media of racist demonization. It's actually toxic to the whole political climate. So, more than ever, we need during this time of shutdown and quarantine to learn and to begin to mobilize new layers of determination. It's a great honor that today there are representatives here from Cuba, Nicaragua, Syria, Venezuela, Iran, and hopefully soon Zimbabwe also joining in a unique discussion. I want to thank UNAC for hosting the webinar and Popular Resistance for streaming it on their Facebook and YouTube platforms. And all of this is an effort to build cooperation in the movement here in the US, to link up with movements around the world, and to really take action. Sanctions Kill as a campaign and a website for cooperation and solidarity and a sharing of resources is what has brought this together, but it's an effort that needs to expand. And it's possible with the real creative participation of so many others. I want to begin today with introducing the speakers. And the first, I want to call on Gail Walker. Gail is the executive director of IFCO, the Interreligious Foundation for Community Organization, which through the Pastors for Peace Project has organized annual friendshipment caravans to Cuba to challenge the US government's brutal blockade of this island nation. She's organized numerous solidarity events, medical exchanges, and other solidarity delegations to Central America and throughout the Caribbean. So, Gail, we turn it over to you. Gail, you have to unmute.
My apologies. I'm sorry about that. I just once again want to say thank you, Sarah, for helping to coordinate this, and just want to say good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for joining us. It is my pleasure to introduce Her Excellency Ambassador Ana Silvia Rodriguez of Cuba, the country that has been exposed to the longest running sanctions campaign and a brutal blockade imposed by the US government. Cuban Ambassador Ana Silvia Rodriguez is a graduate of the internationally renowned Superior Institute of Raul Roa Garcia. Throughout her esteemed diplomatic career, she has served in numerous capacities, including positions at the Cuban Embassy in Grenada and in Trinidad and Tobago, as well as Deputy Director of Multilateral Affairs for Cuba's Foreign Ministry. The ambassador has been a powerful voice advocating for Cuba at the United Nations, where she also serves as Charge d'Affaires. Ambassador Rodriguez, thank you so much for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gail. And first of all, I would like to thank all the organizers of this important webinar and this very crucial moment. I would also want to greet all the audience that I have been seeing in the screen, have been following us from different part of the world. And let me start saying that I am 53 years old and I have living all my life under the economic, commercial, and financial blockade imposed by the government of the United States against Cuba. Like me, 7 out of 10 Cuba do not know how is to live without this system of sanctions that is the most unfair, severe, and prolonged and ever applied against any country. I have to say that there is not a single Cuban family that has not endured the consequences of the blockade to Cuba. The blockade to Cuba started at the beginning of the Cuban Revolution, but officially started when President Kennedy issued in 1962 a decree that they say, well, put an embargo on the trade between the U.S. and Cuba. Just an anecdote, maybe some of you already read it, that before signing this decree, President Kennedy asked his aide to buy all the Cuban cigars in Washington in order to have the stock of Cuban cigar before he signed the decree. Over the years, the blockade to Cuba have been tightened and perfected, and just now it's not only an executive order, it's a very complex array of laws and regulations that require both executive and congressional power for them to be undone. And there is a numerous laws and acts that have been signed all over the year, but in sake of the time, I'm going to make reference only to the what is happening over the last year. You have been seeing over the last year a very aggressive policy of this current administration, U.S. administration, against Cuba, and they have been tightened and further the blockade imposed to my people, with a more notable effect in the application of its extraterritorial effects. Just to put some example on how the blockade in the last year have been strengthened and tightened, let me make some example. The U.S. Department has expanded the restricted list of Cuban entities as sub-entities object of additional sanction to taxes due to the blockade regulation. This measure, not unlike what is also applies to countries like Syria or Iran or Venezuela, causes considerable damage to the country's economy because of its intimidating effect in the international business community by openly targeting government and public entities like companies and even hotels. Sometimes even we joke because one of the company, for example, in the list is a factory that produce sodas like our refreshments. So added to the foregoing is the elimination as of the 5th of June of 2019, the general permit for people-to-people group educational travel, the refusal to permit non-commercial aircraft to travel to Cuba. Now, after that, they added that the charters cannot fly to Cuba, to other cities of Cuba, different from Havana. Now, regular flight cannot travel to other cities from Cuba, different from Havana. And this has an impact in the tourists and also have an impact, directly impact in the emerging Cuba private sector. Additional, the U.S. government has enacted an strategy to prevent the supply of fuel to our country. We can supply maybe half of our consume, but not 100%. So we have to import fuel from other parts of the world. And it's not that Cuba lacks supplier or that it lacks financial resources to cover our needs. What the US government has done is threaten companies that own the tankers, shipping companies, ship owners, ship flag governments, insurance and reinsurance company from different markets, from South America, from Europe, from North America, without having any legal or moral authority to do that. One of the most significant measures that the U.S. government has adopted last year, and most of you know, it was the activation of Title III and Title IV of the Helms-Burton Act. To add insult to the injury, the U.S. government has not even considered suspending, let alone, of course, lifting any of its sanction program in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic. Countries like mine, who already battle on a daily basis with this obstacle, now have to rely even more than ever on the solidarity and the bravery of those willing to defy the US government and help us to contribute to defeating this deadly virus. The COVID-19 pandemic is underscoring the malice and the cruelty of the US blockade against Cuba, a policy that has been always an inhumane policy designed to target and punish an entire population. Today, Cuba is more than ever limited in its ability to purchase medicines, medical equipment, and other necessary supplies to face the pandemic. I'm not going to talk too much about this now because maybe later we can elaborate further on the example on how the blockade to Cuba is hinder our fight against the pandemic. Despite the attempt by ranking official of the US government to deceive the world by saying that its sanctions are aimed to do harm to the government and not to the people of Cuba, it is clear that the economic, commercial, and financial war against Cuba is aimed at killing the people, bringing about hunger, disease, and desperation in order that the people blame the system for their hardship. And this conception starts from since the beginning of the Cuban Revolution, and it's very well written in a memorandum written by the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the State for Inter-American Affairs in 1960. So this is the true nature of the economic, commercial, and financial blockade imposed to Cuba by the United States government. And while the United States government pursues the path of unilateralism and confrontation, my country continues to believe that only together through multilateralism and international cooperation and from not politicized approach will humanity be able to tackle this pandemic or any other pandemic and global challenge. For all over the years to the Cuban Revolution and also for your standing position against the blockade to Cuba. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ana Silva Rodriguez. And we will come back to each representative for a Q&A session. So please all do stay with us. We next want to invite Secretariat of the December 12th movement. Omawali has traveled many times to Zimbabwe and organized solidarity with Zimbabwe for decades of US and British sanctions and in defense of the movement in Zimbabwe for self-determination. Now, due to technical difficulties today with linking with Zimbabwe, Omawali will share remarks on their behalf. So greetings.
Thank you very much, Sarah. First, greetings to all of our panelists and solidarity with those countries who stand with solidarity around the question of self-determination for the people. I come to you to share some remarks about Zimbabwe. And the first thing I want to say is that no one gave Zimbabwe their democracy or their independence. The struggle in Zimbabwe was first and foremost was a struggle to liberate their country from colonialism. But as we have known through the years, that the liberation of a country politically is meaningless if it is not accompanied by the economic development and independence of its economy. And so therefore, after the liberation of Zimbabwe, the Zimbabwean people set about finishing the revolution. And for the masses of people in Zimbabwe, that was to return the land to the people. And so as we sit here talking about the question of sanctions, which is a weapon of war, why has the United States and its allies targeted a small country with 14 million people, lower center of Southern Africa, with these vicious sanctions to destroy their economy and seek regime change? The one fundamental issue for the people of Zimbabwe was the return of their land. The one fundamental problem for the West was what that means for people to take their land back, to return their economy to the people. And so in 2001, the United States, feeling insulted that the Zimbabwean people dared to take their land back, and with their kith and kin in England, set about to destroy the Zimbabwean economy. And they passed a law. Hillary Clinton was very instrumental in passing of that law. It was called Zindera. And the purpose of Zindera was to immediately cut off a country that was now struggling for its development from all of the international trade and international finances that any developing country needs in a world economy, one that cannot exist without this international trade and access for those things that the country does not produce on its own. And so, second only to Cuba, the Zimbabwean people have suffered under US and Western sanctions since 2001 to this current time right now. And in that battle, they have fought to utilize the creativity and the energy of the Zimbabwean people to resist. However, what sanctions do, it creates a crisis, a day-to-day crisis in the lives of people. And so Zindera was not just an economic issue, it was also a political one. How to make the Zimbabwean economy scream so that people were now looking at the question of their day-to-day survival and then begin to look wherever they can. So part and parcel with sanctions is the question of regime change, the question of fermenting and establishing inside countries. And all of the countries that are here today, the ones that are here and the other countries that make up over almost 40 countries that are under sanctions, understand the efforts of the West to create an opposition inside their country, an opposition financed by the West, an opposition that receives all kinds of overt and covert training with one single purpose: to seek regime change, to return land that was stolen from Africans to recolonization. And so for many people who may not be familiar in this listening and watching audience about Zimbabwe, I urge you to study the question of what's going on in Zimbabwe, because Zimbabwe is leading Africa on the question of the fundamental question of the return of its land. And right now, as Zimbabwe struggles against these crushing sanctions against it in Namibia and in South Africa, in Kenya, in all of Southern Africa, the struggle is around the question of recapturing their land. So Zimbabwe is not only a situation in itself, it is also a beacon for how people on the continent will resolve the fundamental question of getting rid of not only colonialism, but neo-colonialism. And so we understand, one, that the sanctions have a tremendous effect on their ability to borrow money, their balance of payments, their ability to borrow and loan to the country so that they will be able to develop. These are all of the things and the tricks financially to undermine the currency, to devalue the currency. We also understand that in Zimbabwe, one of the fundamental questions is the question very recently that happened around crises. When we had Hurricane Ida on the west coast of Southern Africa, it was a tremendous hardship and could cause tremendous damage, not only in Mozambique, but in Zimbabwe too. But without the ability to have the supplies and the trade that goes on to put in the resources of a country to be able to defend against those kinds of natural disasters, it only brings more hardship to the people. It only undermines the economy of that country. The question of COVID-19, the coronavirus, is a pandemic. Where it came from, how it will develop, and how it will resolve itself is determined by the people. But one of the things is very clear, that when anything of a crisis nature happens, those people who are for the people operate in that interest. Those people who are for an imperialist economy operate from that perspective. In Zimbabwe right now, because of the government's astute creativity and commitment to the people, as we speak right now, we only have 4 deaths from the coronavirus. Why? Because we're at the beginning of the pandemic hitting Africa. And those African countries who actually have had a number of years dealing with the question of pandemics sweeping across Africa were somewhat prepared, but their economic systems do not buttress the healthcare systems, and the healthcare systems are very fragile. So I think, as Sarah said, at a time when the international community is coming together to talk about harmony, to talk about interdependence, to talk about cooperation, here is the West, led by the United States, still on its mission to undermine and seek regime change in governments whose only crime to them is they want a free and independent country for their people to develop based on how they see development should be done, determined by their people. And so we're very glad to be here. The Zimbabweans will be back here again. We know last October in SADC, the 14 countries of Southern Africa, there was a declaration of an international day against sanctions by all 14 countries in Southern Africa, October 25th, which launched a campaign to continue that motion around ending the sanctions. The African Union has taken a position about that. President E.D. Mnangagwa was just at the non-aligned movement through virtual television. But in the non-aligned movement, they also voiced their concern and opposition to sanctions. Sanctions are a weapon of war, a war that we must win. And so everyone listening and participating in this webinar, it is critical for you to pay close attention to detail so that we're on the right side of history. Thank you.
Thank you, Omowale Clay, speaking for the December 12th movement on behalf of Zimbabwe. We would next like to bring on Jerry Condon, a Vietnam War era veteran who organized many veterans' actions against the U.S. Contra War in Nicaragua and has participated in many solidarity delegations to Nicaragua and to other countries targeted by the U.S. Jerry is also the past president of Veterans for Peace. So, Jerry, we call on you.
Thank you. It's an honor to introduce you to Francisco O. Campbell, Nicaragua's ambassador to the United States and a longtime leader in Nicaragua's continuing struggle for freedom and independence. Ambassador Campbell was born and raised in the Afro-Caribbean community of Bluefields on the Caribbean coast of Nicaragua. He has been a driving force in building institutions in this autonomous region populated by indigenous peoples and the descendants of African slaves. From 1986 to 1990, Francisco Campbell served as Nicaragua's ambassador to Zimbabwe, when Zimbabwe held the position of the presidency of the non-aligned movement. He was also concurrent ambassador to Tanzania, Angola, Zambia, and representative before the African National Congress in South Africa and the Southwest African Peoples Organization in Namibia. Between 1997 and 2010, Ambassador Campbell served as an elected Nicaraguan member to the Central American Parliament and as its vice president from 2007 to 8. Ambassador Campbell is quite familiar with Washington, D.C., having served as congressional liaison in the 1980s during the U.S.-backed Contra War in Nicaragua. He has served as Nicaragua's ambassador to the United States since 2010. Please welcome Ambassador Francisco Campbell.
Hello, Jerry. First of all, I want to thank the organizers of this important and timely event. Likewise, my special thanks to you, Jerry, for your kind introduction. As is known, I have dealt with you for many years, more than 35 years to be exact. And I've always been impressed with your steadfast commitment and unwavering solidarity in the struggle for the right to self-determination, justice, and peace throughout the world. The topic of the panel, Sanctioned Skill, addresses those very issues. And the core purpose of the sanctions being imposed on our countries is to inflict hardship, pain, and suffering on our people to demoralize and destabilize in pursuit of the overthrow of legitimate governments like the one in Nicaragua that refused to bend to the dictates of neocolonialist ambitions. Under the leadership of President Daniel Ortega, the Nicaragua government has been implementing a policy of reconciliation and national unity, with the fight against poverty its main priority. This policy, which is sustained by a strong participatory democracy, has been successful in promoting economic growth with social inclusion, and until recently, the country was registering an annual average GDP growth of 5%. The various social programs being implemented have dramatically reduced hunger and malnutrition in Nicaragua. Free health care throughout the country is guaranteed. Free public education has been restored. Highways integrating the countries are being built, opening new areas for agricultural production. Food security is a very important topic in Nicaragua. Sectors of our society previously ignored or excluded, such as women, campesinos, and the Afro-descendant and indigenous communities of the Caribbean coast, are now active and effective participants in the construction of a more just society that benefits the majority poor and not only the privileged few, as has been the case throughout most of our history. These accomplishments, widely recognized around the world, have meant nothing to sectors in the United States and Europe who continue to view political processes in other parts of the world through the smoky lens of ideological prejudice, ignoring the practical realities that may exist in individual countries. The hostility of the United States government toward the Sandinista revolution was reiterated when the George W. Bush administration in 2017 suspended bilateral aid after the return to power of President Ortega, resuming the policy of systematic interventions to subvert the will of the Nicaraguan people through various forms of aggression, including financial sanctions. These sanctions, whereby the United States government is using its influence in international financial institutions to block loans to Nicaragua, are arbitrary and in flagrant violation of international law, including the United Nations Charter that calls for respect of national sovereignty and peaceful coexistence among states. At a time when the world is being afflicted by the deadly COVID-19 pandemic, it is imperative that these sanctions that are intended to cause suffering and destruction be eliminated, enabling our countries to deal with the myriad challenges to our healthcare systems, as well as the effects of the coronavirus and the national economy and the economies of the world. I would now like to briefly describe actions taken by Nicaragua to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. As soon as the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a pandemic, the Nicaragua government activated the community and family public health care model that emphasizes preventive measures and community organizations. All relevant national and international protocols are being implemented. Health brigades have visited more than 4 million people in their homes to inform and create awareness of the importance of hygiene measures such as frequent washing of hands, wearing masks, social distancing, as well as taking body temperature to detect suspicious cases, establishing monitoring and coordinated contact tracing when necessary. Similarly, public facilities and transportation are continuously being disinfected. At the same time, 19 hospitals in the country were placed on alert to deal with the possible influx of COVID-19 cases and are complemented by mobile clinic units. All border posts and ports of entries are duly equipped to handle and monitor possible cases. And agreements were reached with Costa Rica in the south and Honduras in the north to protect the borders against illegal entries. At the regional level, Nicaragua, along with the other members countries of the Central American integration system, have taken measures to facilitate and ensure the normal functioning of trade and commerce in the region, and to coordinate efforts for the purchase of medical equipment and supplies necessary to deal with the pandemic. International support has also been vital to the Nicaragua strategy against COVID-19, particularly the assistance provided by Cuba, Taiwan, South Korea, among others. The indications are that, like in other countries, the coronavirus will remain a challenge in Nicaragua for some time. But in this, as in other moments of difficulty, we are confident the indomitable spirit and determination of the Nicaraguan people will once again prevail. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Francisco Campbell. There's really a wealth of information that we're hearing that we don't have a chance to hear. It's just blocked by the media. We next want to call on Baman Azad, who is an Iranian-American peace and justice activist. He's the organizational secretary of the U.S. Peace Council, a founder of the Coalition Against U.S. Foreign Military Bases, a member of Veterans for Peace, and an organizer of many solidarity delegations to countries targeted by the U.S. So, Baman, give you the floor.
Thank you, sir. I've been given the honor of introducing Dr. Bashar Jafari, Ambassador of Syria to the United Nations. I have had the honor of working with Dr. Jafari for many years on various occasions and for various causes, and it's now an honor to introduce him. Dr. Jafari really doesn't need that much introduction. Most of us are very familiar with his fiery speeches and powerful comments at the United Nations and especially at the Security Council in defense of the rights of the Syrian people, its sovereignty, the country's sovereignty and national determination and independence. Dr. Jafari has been very critical in exposing the hypocrisy of the US government in its claim of supporting democracy, human rights, and international law. Syria has been under attack since 2011, at least. And with the help of US mercenaries, the Islamic State, terrorists, and few other US mercenary forces, Syria has been suffering from a lot of mass killings by these people, by these criminals. And now it is being occupied, some parts of its territory, by the United States and its allies, by Israeli government, and recently by Turkey. So the question of the struggle for maintaining and safeguarding the integrity, territorial integrity of Syria, protecting its independence and sovereignty is an issue for all of us. I am honored to introduce to you Dr. Bashar Jafari.
Thank you so much, dear friend, Dr. Bahman, for inviting me to participate at this very noble and lofty webinar. I'm very glad to see these lovely faces of friends that I haven't seen for a while, but I have you all in my heart. Dear colleagues, allow me to thank you for holding this important meeting and for dedicating this time to us. Even though it is a weekend and despite the circumstances we all live in due to the outbreak of this unexpected virus. Although, as you know, we are suffering from too many viruses. Some of them are humans, some of them are not. We deep appreciate the initiative of the US Peace Council to launch the petition of the open letter to stop economic sanctions and all other initiatives that aim to work for collective actions to oppose regime change efforts in targeted countries through military intervention and sanctions imposition. You have said it, it's about 39 countries out of 193 countries, which is the total number of member states at the United Nations, meaning that almost 1/5 of the humanity are suffering from sanctions. This is too much. We are all facing an extraordinary circumstance and going through a critical time in which our world trying to deal and contain the spread of COVID-19, which requires real synergy of the efforts of all governments without exception, and unification of international, regional, and national measures for prevention and treatment. However, the countries which suffer from the severe negative impact of the unilateral coercive economic measures deal with additional pressure and challenges of a different type in the face of this pandemic. In addition to that, the sustained negative effects of these illegal measures on the welfare of citizens, their daily lives, and their ability to enjoy basic health and education services. The current crisis situation linked to the spread of this dangerous virus poses new and unprecedented challenges to the Syrian government, foremost of which are the following. First, providing basic infrastructure and necessary ingredients for the health sectors in order to provide prevention, checks, and treatment for all without exception. Second, providing basic medical, nutritional, and service materials to everyone without exception. Third, empowering the Syrian economy in a way that gives the government and the public and private sectors the ability to support and finance the necessary plans and procedures to ensure the containment of the spread of this virus, especially in fields of sterilization, isolation, and closing public and private places and facilities. Unilateral coercive measures directly affect the ability of the main economic sectors in Syria to perform their tasks effectively, especially in the fields of energy, banking, health, industry, transportation, communications, internal and external trade, adjust the local currency rate, and combating high prices of all basic materials and services, etc., etc. I would like to point out here that these punitive and unlawful measures and allow me to underline these two very important words: unlawful, punitive and unlawful measures, because according to the UN Charter, what is called sanctions are unlawful and illegal and illegitimate. The UN does not recognize any regime of sanctions. The only legitimate sanctions recognized by the UN member states are the ones imposed by the Security Council, only the Security Council. And none of these 39 countries suffering from European and economic sanctions, none of them has been, none of them has suffered sanctions endorsed by the Security Council. So all these sanctions are illegitimate, punitive, and unlawful. I reiterate, I would like to point out here that these punitive and unlawful measures continue to cause a weakening of the ability of the public and private medical sector in Syria to import medicines and medical materials due to the tight targeting of these unilateral coercive measures to the Syrian banking sector, especially in the field of foreign bank transfer. Moreover, many companies specialized in the medical and pharmaceutical industries refrain from dealing or contracting with the public and private sectors in Syria, fearing that they would be targeted with financial, banking, and commercial sanctions imposed by the US government or any third party that it considered had violated the US economic blockade imposed on the Syrian Arab Republic. The US government imposes a wide series of coercive unilateral economic measures on the Syrian Arab Republic. And in reference to the recent fact sheets and press releases regarding exemptions, exceptions, and authorizations for humanitarian assistance and trade from the US Office of Foreign Assets Control, known as OFAC. These so-called exemptions granted by the US Treasury Department were and are still subject to politicized considerations that lead to the delivery of this aid to areas that are controlled by terrorist armed groups, which in turn take over this aid and prevent it from reaching its true beneficiaries, with the aim of supporting the position of these terrorist groups, prolonging the war and obstructing the prospects for a final and comprehensive settlement. This paragraph is very important, as you see, because it explains to everybody that these State Department claims that the American administration does not impose or does not prevent the exportation of humanitarian assistance to Syria is wrong. It is not correct. The American administration allows only sending so-called humanitarian assistance with weaponry, of course, and mercenaries and money coming from the Gulf states, only to the terrorist groups in the northwest and northeast of Syria. Moreover, the Central Bank of Syria was also unable to take advantage of the Syrian funds frozen abroad. Our own funds, by the way, Syrian funds. They are frozen abroad with the aim of financing the materials that are related to the basic needs of the Syrian people. As the international or foreign banks did not respond to the payment orders issued by the central bank, and the Syrian parties did not get any response to the communications, neither through the banking correspondence system or through diplomatic channels. We highly appreciate your dedication to the cause of lifting the unilateral sanctions imposed on the peoples of 39 countries. And we invite you to pay special attention to the conditions of Palestinian citizens under Israeli occupation and the Syrian citizens in the Syrian occupied Golan, who are deprived of their rights to sufficient medical and health care. So as you see, we are suffering from too many types of terrorism. The latest type introduced by those who impose sanctions on 39 countries is what we call the health terrorism. They already imposed political terrorism, they already imposed economic terrorism, and now they are imposing health terrorism. Of course, we add to this financial terrorism and educational one and media terrorism. In conclusion, the government of Syria confirms that it has mobilized all its human, medical, and nutritional resources available to serve all Syrians, wherever they are in the face of this global COVID-19 pandemic. Syria also highly appreciates the positions and statements made by the Secretary General of the United Nations recently, in which he called for an end to unilateral coercive measures imposed on many peoples of the world, including the Syrian people. Allow me here to open brackets to explain to you a little bit what's going on right now in the United Nations. Since the Secretary General, Mr. Guterres, announced twice on the 23rd and 27th of March, he announced twice, actually, the necessity to lift the economic sanctions imposed on the countries victims of this immoral system. Twice he did it. And since these two calls happened, we saw at the United Nations, the General Assembly precisely, to be precise, we saw several initiatives, several draft resolutions or statements submitted by dozens of member states. Of course, all of them are infiltrated by Western European countries or by the American delegation. These dozens of statements and the draft resolutions, all of them lacked any reference to the necessity of ending the economic unilateral coercive measures. Although the Secretary General was very clear in his two calls on the 23rd and 27th of March, or of April, sorry, with regard the necessity of lifting the sanctions in order to enable those who are victims of the sanctions to confront the pandemic. The Syrian government affirms that any collective and global effort to combat and eliminate the spread of this dangerous virus cannot achieve the desired results in light of the continuing policy of imposing economic blockade by some governments, led by the United States of America, of course, on more than 2 billion people in the world. 2 billion people are suffering from economic sanctions, including China, of course, and Russia. Let me just conclude by telling you an unfortunate incident that took place today. And it shows how those who impose sanctions on the Syrian people have abandoned humanitarian considerations and have become prisoners of political obsession by punishing those who don't go along with their policies. Today, Saturday, the European Union decided to reject the request of the Syrian government to send aircraft to return the Syrian expatriates in some European Union countries who wish to return to Syria in light of this global pandemic. The reason is the unilateral sanctions policy imposed also on the Syrian people, on the Syrian air transport sector. Needless to say that the Europeans will not provide an alternative solution, and those Syrians may remain stuck there, unable to return to their country. So where is the humanitarian concerns of this phony West? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bashar Jafari. And this is an important term that you have brought into the discussion, health terrorism, along with military, economic, financial terrorism. We're going to come back to this in our Q&A. We next want to bring up Terry Mattson, who is with the Latin America Campaign Coordinator for Code Pink. She's led anti-sanctions campaign delegation to Venezuela, spent 3 months there, is a founder and program manager for the Intrepid News Fund, and the co-founder of the Campaign to End US and Canada Sanctions Against Venezuela. She recently returned from a 3-week visit to Cuba and Venezuela. So Terry, we give it to you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It's really an honor to be here this afternoon on behalf of Code Pink and on behalf of introducing Mr. Carlos Ron from Venezuela. I'm really pleased that all of us were able to put this project together, all of the solidarity coalitions, as well as all of you who so graciously accepted the invitation to attend this webinar. So this afternoon, I have the honor of introducing a wonderful person who has represented Venezuela for probably most of his life. Carlos Ron is currently the Vice Minister of North America of the People's Power Ministry of Foreign Relations. Carlos's life's work has been with the creation and continued development of the Bolivarian Project. All of this against 20 years of US efforts to force regime change in Venezuela. Regime change beginning in 1999 with the election of Hugo Chavez, regime change in the form of a media coup, and later escalating into US unilateral sanctions against Venezuela beginning in December of 2014. And then in May of 2019, we saw the US government seize the Venezuelan embassy here in Washington, DC. And all of that Carlos has seen. And he most recently, most of you would probably recognize his face in Washington, DC. He served for many years as the charge d'affaires in Washington at the Venezuelan embassy. He served in that position until May of 2018. After the democratic re-election of Nicolas Maduro in May of 2018, Carlos returned to Caracas. And that is where he is joining us from today. And he does serve as Vice Minister of the Foreign Ministry. We are extraordinarily fortunate to have him join us today on the heels of the May 3rd mercenary incursion in Venezuela, the failed incursion that attempted to overthrow democratically elected President Nicolas Maduro. So Carlos, thank you so much for your time today. And it's a real honor to be able to introduce you this afternoon and have you join all of us.
Well, thank you, Terry, and for your kind words. And thank you all for putting this together. Also to the colleagues that are joining us. I thank you as well for this effort, because it is important that we as countries are undergoing this violent aggression from the United States, that we are able to all join together and defend multilateralism, defend the Charter of the United Nations, and defend diplomacy over all forms of against all forms of aggression. Very briefly, because I know we have a lot of guests and a lot of topics to cover. Venezuela's been under U.S. Unilateral coercive measures, as they should be called, and not sanctions. Under since about 2006, when we first started with some prohibitions on military equipment and of the sort. But we have also had a spike, I would say, of this of these aggressions starting on the year 2014 with some legislation approved in Congress that led to a 2015 executive order by President Obama, where Venezuela was declared an unusual and extraordinary threat to the foreign policy and of the United States and the national security of the United States. After this, they first started with some members of the government being sanctioned with by nameplate being placed on list. And of course, the rhetoric of the United States is that this is only targeting these individuals, but it doesn't have any effect, which is not true, because as we all know, once you have somebody in a high position or in a crucial position for a country, be it president, be it the president of its national bank, these people that do contracts, that have business, that have interactions of any sort, would also would feel that they cannot do so because they're going to be somehow reprimanded by U.S. government, and it starts affecting the nation itself. With the coming of President Trump, then we saw tougher measures against Venezuela. We right now, and for time's sake, I'm not going to go over every one of the sanctions that have been issued, but we have prohibition of import and export of oil, which is our main industry, and that in itself is something key for Venezuelan economy. It's our main source of income. But we've also had the measures taken that entail a financial blockade. We have money over $9 billion that have been blocked in banks, that are in accounts in the United States and elsewhere, that the financial system from the United States gets access to, that are not that we're not able to manage or to use. And not only the executive orders from the Obama or Trump administrations are the ones that hurt, but there are other things that cause as much damage. And there's an advisory issued by FinCEN from the Treasury Department to the financial system, basically saying, this was September 2017, basically saying any money that comes from the state of Venezuela or the government agencies in Venezuela may be construed as money that was involved in drug trafficking or was involved in some illegal activity. And with that said, that means that anything that is basically that we attempt to pay, any transaction that we try to do, somehow gets blocked. So the rhetoric by the State Department and by Treasury and by the U.S. government is, well, this is not true because we have issued licenses where the money, if they're going to make a food purchase, it's not going to be blocked. If they're going to make a purchase of for medicine, it's not going to be blocked. This is not true, because once you're going to make a payment, regardless of what type of payment you are going to do, I mean, the transaction is is being blocked in itself. So whenever you try to, whether you're trying to buy a table or whether you're trying to buy, a pound of rice, in either case, the transaction itself is blocked. And this is very important because we have to break down this myth that what they do doesn't affect people. As a matter of fact, it was interesting because they know that this goes on, and they know it because their own members of Congress, recently there was a letter issued a couple of weeks ago by 11 senators where they say, they tell the administration, precisely because of COVID-19, that they should lift the sanctions on Iran and Venezuela in this particular letter. And there's a passage which I'm going to read to you because I think it's very important. It shows exactly the level of hypocrisy in the official message comes from the United States. It says, the letter says, "We understand that the administration has stated that humanitarian and medical needs are exempt from U.S. sanctions. But our sanctions regime is so broad that medical suppliers and relief organizations simply steer clear of doing business in Iran and in Venezuela in fear of accidentally getting caught up in U.S. sanctions web." See, these are lawmakers from the United States who are saying this. This is not myself. This is not my government. This is not any of our colleagues here. It's lawmakers from the United States. Yesterday, there was a bill introduced in Congress also, where addressing the issues of COVID-19, where they actually says as well that they want to make sure that the U.S. institutions know that they should ease, or they should make sure everybody knows that any purchases dealing with health or food or in this time period should not be blocked. So if they have to say it, if they have to bind the administration by law, in order for that to be carried out, it is because it's a problem. It is because they know and they understand that this is not something that this is not a flow of medicine and food that enters the country without being somehow subjected to problems. And I'm not saying it's just food and medicine, because those are the primary things that we think about. But there's a sabotage on the Venezuelan oil sector. There's a sabotage on spare parts for industry, and all these things add up to making this particular situation of COVID-19 a very serious one. We have to denounce this, because there is an inherent contradiction in the rhetoric. Because every time all of our countries are somehow accused, and or the justification that is used in order to say that these sanctions are legal, or that they have the right to apply these sanctions, often include the human rights discourse. And there's a political misuse, ill-intentioned use of something as serious as human rights. And it's a contradiction, because the same people that are denouncing us for human rights are committing a savage violation of human rights on all of our populations, because they're subjecting them to the hardships that entail these sanctions and these blockades. We have presented before the International Criminal Court a case where we're trying to for the court to recognize that these people in charge of the policies towards Venezuela are committing acts of collective punishment, and it is an act of extermination against the Venezuelan people. So that being said, how are we dealing with this? And I tell you, we know the purpose of these measures are undoubtedly regime change. And Venezuela right now, perhaps in the last couple of weeks, we have felt the most intensive advance from the Trump administration against us in this manner. We had indictments against our officials. We had a transition plan, which is basically a capitulation that they want us to subject to. They have launched a military operation, which is the largest military operation in the region in the last 30 years, in order to supposedly combat narco traffic or drug trafficking in our region. But it is all aimed at the same things of building greater pressure against us in the time of COVID-19, because the purpose precisely is that we have both the pressure of the sanctions and the pressure of the disease somehow affecting and leading to the change of government that they want. The reality is this: this is a tough situation with COVID-19, because suppliers don't wish to sell, because they're afraid of what would happen. Because if those that wish to sell, they agree to sell, they'll charge 2 or 3 times the price that we need to pay. And because paying, like I said, has always been a challenge. Let me tell you something too. When this situation began, COVID-19, we communicated to U.S. authorities that this was a hardship, and that if it was true that they would allow the basic items to be purchased, we gave them the numbers of accounts. We gave them the needs that we had. We showed them, this is the order. This is what we're buying: masks, tools. They said not really of yours to the side, because you're not the legitimate government of Venezuela. Guaido represents the legitimate government. So it's back to their own. Again, it's one more time back to their own regime change operation. We've against this virus of unilateralism and of arbitrary actions. By using let's use the common phrases of the time. I think we have the vaccines of multilateralism and solidarity. We have worked with Cuba, with our brothers and sisters of Cuba, of China, of Russia, who have shown extreme solidarity to Venezuela. We had the Henry Reeve delegation from Cuba come in to Venezuela, where they have helped us follow to and visit our population and make sure that they are tested. We have received donations of equipments from China and from Russia. Just last night we had an arrival of vials of insulin that are needed. We received over 30,000 tests from Russia. China has helped as well with tests and has helped with a brigade of experts that came to Venezuela also to help us deal with this pandemic. And we have had also the support of the World Health Organization, and we're working together with them in order to address this. Venezuela today is the country in the region that has carried out the most number of tests. We are on around 507,000 tests, and we have, which is about a percentage of 16,900 per million inhabitants. And we carried out with one of our systems, a network of social programs, the Patria system. We have carried out surveys in order to identify where people with a high risk are and where we can reach out to them and test them and make sure that we can contain the spread. Over 19 million people have responded to this. And we have made over 201,000 visits to homes to make sure that we help contain this. And we have we have a team of over 11,000 doctors working at this in this case. So this is a response that is also, which is very important to say, this is also accompanied by popular organization, by our communes, by our grassroots organizations that through all these years of aggression of the United States, they have perfected their community work alliances and just the caring for each other. And it has been key and instrumental because the way we have our community doctors and the way we have the community helping each other with food, with distributing information about how to prevent this disease has been key, has been a key response to the Venezuelan people in the midst of this aggression. Again, thank you very much. Sorry for taking so much time, but I think these are very passionate issues that we have to address. And I thank you again for the solidarity that you've always had with the people of Venezuela, with President Maduro, and with all of us at the Bolivarian government. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos Ron Martinez, especially in explaining just how calculated and sinister the sanctions are, combined the US military plans. Seeing the whole picture, so important. We next want to bring on Margaret Flowers. Margaret is a co-director of Popular Resistance, co-host of the radio program Clearing the Fog, and a member of the Embassy Protection Collective, still facing charges for the courageous defense of the Venezuelan embassy. Margaret is a medical doctor, a pediatrician. So thank you, Margaret.
Thank you, Sarah. Can you see me now? Let's see.
Yeah.
Coming up.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. It's really an honor to be able to introduce to you Dr. Majid Takht Ravanchi, who is currently the permanent representative of Iran to the United Nations. I had the honor to visit Iran in February of 2019 on a peace delegation organized by Code Pink. Dr. Ravanchi served as the Deputy Chief of Staff for Political Affairs in the Office of the President beginning in 2017. Prior to that, he was the Deputy Foreign Minister for European and American Affairs from 2013 to 2017. Going backward, he was the Deputy Director of the Encyclopedia of Contemporary Islam between 2009 and 2013. Then he was an advisor to the Foreign Minister from 2006 to 2009, Ambassador to Switzerland and Liechtenstein before that, and before that, Special Advisor to the Foreign Minister from 1998 to 2002. Dr. Ravanchi also served as at the United Nations in New York from 1992 to 1998 with the rank of ambassador, holding the position of Deputy Permanent Representative and Counselor. Dr. Ravanchi holds a doctorate in political science from the University of Bern, Switzerland, and a master's degree in international political economy and development from Fordham University in the United States. He has also earned a master's and bachelor degrees in civil engineering from the University of Kansas, which is also in the United States. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Majid Takht Ravanchi.
Thank you, Dr. Flowers, for the introduction. Very glad to be here, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. It's indeed a pleasure to address this important international webinar, which is organized by altruist people who I wholeheartedly thank for their very valuable campaign to enhance the awareness of world public opinion on the need to fight COVID-19 without any hindrance. Representing a country whose people have seriously suffered as a result of over 4 decades of inhumane sanctions, today I will focus on the impacts of the current US sanctions on Iran, particularly our capacity to fight COVID-19 and to address its vast socioeconomic consequences. In our common fight against COVID-19, all of humanity is on the same front. And to succeed quickly and sustainably, we must ensure that no community or nation is left alone and behind. Therefore, any act restricting the ability of nations to tackle this crisis would help the disease spread like wildfire, consequently weakening the global fight against the pandemic. A clear example in this regard is the continued application of unilateral sanctions against us, which undermine our front from within in favor of the disease and function exactly like the enemy's fifth column. Now let me briefly explain how sanctions inhibit Iran's ability to fight COVID-19. While Iran is experiencing one of the worst outbreaks of the coronavirus, the US sanctions, which according to its officials are the most extensive sanctions ever imposed on a country, are drastically hindering Iran's efforts to treat patients and effectively prevent the spread of the virus. This is despite the fact that Iran's medical facilities, doctors, and nurses are among the very finest in the world, and the professional nature of our national efforts to suppress COVID-19 is highly acknowledged by the WHO. To escape from the disgrace of the illegal and immoral nature of sanctions, the US officials continue to claim that humanitarian and medical needs are exempt from sanctions, but they are not. On February 27, 2020, the US Treasury finalized with much fanfare the Suez Humanitarian Trade Arrangement, Suez Channel, allowing certain humanitarian transactions with Iran. However, this narrow channel does not match Iran's humanitarian needs in the current situation. At the same time, the United States has forced this Suez Channel to pursue a very tight and tough procedure under pretext like ensuring the utmost transparency or enhanced due diligence, requiring companies to provide extensive information to the Treasury Department every month on the Iranian beneficiaries of the goods, the Iranian company's business relationship and financial details, and the like, thus making it practically very difficult for companies to trade with Iran. Additionally, the almost impossible or cumbersome nature of transferring Iran's reserves blocked outside the country to the designated Swiss bank not only does not allow the Suez Channel to function properly now, but may actually render it redundant in a matter of few months. Likewise, recently several companies that supply the medicine and medical equipment required to fight the coronavirus have stopped shipping to Iran because the current US sanctions regime makes the shipping of such items to Iran almost impossible. Moreover, the only message of the US's additional new sanctions imposed in the midst of the outbreak is that companies must avoid doing any business with Iran, even their work is humanitarian in nature. In short, the US sanctions regime, including the relevant penalties, is extremely broad and has created a compliance minefield for the legal trade with Iran, and consequently, medical supplies and relief organizations simply steer clear of doing business in Iran in the fear of accidentally getting caught up in the US sanctions web. From the start of COVID-19 outbreak, we have received valuable emergency aid from some countries as well as from the WHO and certain humanitarian organizations. Nevertheless, for a vast country like Iran, with a population of nearly 83 million, which is among the worst impacted countries by COVID-19, such emergency aid is not the panacea. Accordingly, due to the vast impacts of COVID-19 pandemic on almost all aspects of life in the affected societies, neither Iran nor any other country can rely only on emergency aids. Hence, the immediate removal of all sanctions on banking, insurance, transportation, medical, industry, energy, exports, imports, and the like is a must, as it would enable the targeted countries to use freely and fully their own resources to effectively suppress the pandemic and address its short and long-term impacts. This is what the international community is calling for, the living example of which is this webinar, as well as other similar efforts of civil society in different corners of the world. As you might be well aware, such strong and repeated calls have recently been made, also by the United Nations Secretary General, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, a number of UN human rights rapporteurs, some other international dignitaries, as well as many former and current statesmen and stateswomen, parliamentarians, including in the US, religious leaders, and academia. Likewise, at the world stage, such important political groupings like the Group of 77 and China, with more than 130 member states, as well as 120 member states of the non-aligned movement, including in its recent virtual summit on COVID-19, have joined the international calls for the removal of sanctions. To conclude, I would like to once again thank the organizers of this webinar and recognize the value of your efforts. Indeed, nothing is more humanistic than confronting such immoral and inhumane policies like weaponizing medicine and food in these trying times. I thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Ambassador Vanchi. I very much appreciate your comments here today. Every one of these speakers really provides such a wealth of information, and we will provide this in text, in radio, in video formats in the days ahead, because it's just invaluable, and it is what is taken away from the movement. Before a second round of questions, and we do hope these busy diplomats can stay with us for a few more minutes, we want to take time for a couple of announcements, and also to say to everyone that we will be back in 3 weeks with attention on other countries strangled by Wall Street and the banks based on US regulations. particular attention on Palestine and a whole number of other countries along with these sanctioned countries. But right now, we want to take a minute before Q&A to draw attention to what else you can do. And we want to bring back Baman Azad for that, and to also call on Emily Thomas, who is with IFCO Pastors for Peace, a longtime activist who has traveled to Cuba and been so much a part. As she said, she's so glad that a little thing like retirement hasn't kept her from doing what she can to make a better world possible. So for both Baman Azad and for Emily Thomas, let's take just an announcement, and then we'll have time also for the Q&A. So
thank you, Sarah. Thank you. Well, people have heard by now, if they hadn't before, the crimes against humanity that is being committed by the United States government against the people of the world in every corner. And this has been going on for a long time, but it seems that it's intensifying right now. The US government is using the COVID-19 pandemic as a kind of a smoke screen to intensify the attack and the regime change policies on some of these countries. We know that about Venezuela with those incursions that happened, the dispatch of deployment of US warships to the shores of Venezuela. We know US is reinforcing again its forces in Iraq, threatening Iran left and right, as we know that. And given all that, at the same time, it is election times in the United States, and we know that sometimes prior to the elections, some incumbent presidents are willing to take some extreme measures to get themselves elected. So all of these point to the fact that we are dealing with an emergency on our hand, and we need to deal with it and be prepared for it. So there are ongoing events, activities that are on our agenda, and we invite all of you to participate in. One is the International Week of Anti-Imperialist Action that we had scheduled for May 25th, which is the African Liberation Day, and goes to May 31st. The second is a webinar that Sarah mentioned briefly. We are shooting to have a second webinar with the participation of the People's Movement representatives on March 31st, hopefully. We are organizing that. There is an ongoing open letter to the Secretary General of the United Nations and the President of the United States that is collecting signatures, and letters are being sent demanding that US military actions be stopped during this crisis period and forever, and also sanctions be lifted. You can go to uspeacecouncil.org. The petition is there, but also on UNAC site, Sanctioned Skill site, and many other organizations. They have a link to that petition and letter. You can sign. Please do that. So far, we have collected over 8,200 signatures. We are shooting for at least 10,000, so we need your support for that. And finally, we are coming up with a pledge on the part of the people in the United States to commit themselves to be vigilant and be ready to take action if something crazy starts happening again, as it did last week. So we are asking you to sign on Sanctioned Skill webpage. I hope we can put it on the website right now. A commitment to be willing to get on a list for action alerts if something needs to be done quickly. I'm going to ask Emily to read the content of that pledge for you, and I encourage you to please make sure you sign that pledge. Thank you.
Thank you, Baman, and thank you, everyone. The pledge, as Baman said, is something that each of us can do, and we can share with other people in our neighbors, our friends, our family, and our faith communities, and to have a large number of people ready to respond. We know that the Trump administration has used COVID-19 to intensify their regime change effects on the targeted countries. We've seen military intervention. We've seen increased sanctions enforcement. The pledge. I am opposed to military action, mercenary armies, and the continued economic sanctions on the 39 countries by the US. I pledge to work for collective action to oppose these threats. Please add my name for emergency response. Sign it, join us all together, and we shall overcome.
Thank you so much, Emily. Thank you. We next, and just to say that we will be back in 3 weeks. We want to take some more questions from our speakers, from our excellent panelists. Before we do, just a word of introduction on one of the tireless webmasters of Sanctions Kill, Jim Wallace, a labor activist, now a retired school teacher, and the thousands of signers, a wealth of information of the whole anti-sanctions movement is on the Sanctions Kill site, thanks to the work of Jim. That means every organization that is working against sanctions, we're trying to put links on this site so we can cooperate and collaborate together. So Jim Wallace, thank you. And just if you describe a bit about the page. Jim.
Yeah. Thanks ever so much. Margaret Flowers is also an important webmaster. Hopefully, if you haven't, you will go to sanctionskill.org. One of the exciting aspects of the Sanctions Kill effort is the principled, non-sectarian collaboration of so many groups, many of whom have already been mentioned already, and who are listed among the initial endorsers on the endorsers page. There's also an incredible list of other organizational endorsers from all around the world. And quite honestly, we got so many thousands of individual endorsers, we just couldn't keep up with them all. So that's very, very dated. From the Sanctions Kill, you can get the translation in many languages. You can get a resource page, which has an incredible amount of information, a special COVID-19 and sanctions section, and a new place to sign the pledge. We want to encourage creativity for the May 25th to 31st International Week of Actions against US imposed sanctions and economic war. Please be sure to add any sanctions related efforts for the ongoing actions page that you are doing, whether in general against sanctions or related to a specific country. Send to info@sanctionskill.org. Solidarity to all, stay well, and power to the people.
Thank you, Jim. And now we want to bring each of the representatives who spoke for a round of questions. I think we'll have to do this by raising hands, or just jump in, turn on your sound and your video. But one of the questions that we had is, how can greater solidarity and exchange help you in the campaign at the UN to end the sanctions and in the international campaigns to end the sanctions? Another question that has popped up again and again, and you can address either, or you may want to have comment on another aspect that has happened in the discussion. But it is that with all essential equipment and medicines in such short supply, especially due to sanctions, how your country is able to cope with this global pandemic, how people's mobilizations are helping in some way to grapple with this fierce problem. So either question or your own comments are very welcome at this time. And thank you to everyone who's been participating so far. We could do it in the order at which we were speaking originally, which I think we would go to Ambassador Ana Silva Rodriguez if she is available to come on. I'm not. We don't have an official way of coping at this time with how we'll handle the Q&A, and I do hope that our representatives will jump in. Oh, thank you.
So sorry, I have to jump from the bathroom. So could you repeat your question again? I just saw the last part.
Yes, it is how can greater solidarity and exchange help you in the campaign at the UN and in other international forums to end the sanctions, and also that with so much essential equipment and medicine blocked, how you're able to cope, and in the case of Cuba, certainly help other countries to cope with this global pandemic.
Of course, solidarity is essential in our campaign, not only in favor of Cuba, but all the countries that suffer from economic coercive measures, that suffer from sanctions. Solidarity, we need the solidarity to continue pushing the governments who are imposing sanctions to us in order to change the policy. Because of the solidarity, Cuba have this great support all over the world against his battle against the blockade. So I think that without you, and now I avail this opportunity again to thank all the solidarity movement in favor of Cuba for the long-standing position supporting the Cuban revolution, supporting the Cuban battle, for your unwavering position. Regarding the needs, of course, the impact of the sanction, I'm imagining that for all of us that suffer sanction, and in order to cope with the COVID, we are having has an effect in Cuba with masks, with rapid kits to test, with disposable protection for the personnel that is working in the hospital. But also we are trying to manage, and thanks again to other countries that are helping us. We receive donation from China, from Russia. Sometimes donation cannot arrive to Cuba because of the blockade to Cuba. For example, a big donation for Alibaba Foundation, that they are donated ventilators, rapid kits, masks, and could not arrive to Cuba because of the carrier. At the very last moment said that they are receiving pressure for the U.S. government, that they are going to receive sanctions so that they cannot send this donation to Cuba. But mainly these are the things that are most needed.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I don't know if Ambassador Francisco Campbell would like to jump in, or if there's someone else who's coming on. Ambassador Banshi from Iran. Yes. That's calling you. You have to unmute though.
Yes, I just did. Thank you very much. For your first question, I think what is important is to raise awareness in different parts of the world that this pandemic or other problems that the whole humanity faces, like environmental degradation. You can name a lot of questions these days, a lot of issues that do not recognize borders. Pandemics like the one that we are dealing with these days, COVID-19, does not recognize borders. It cannot be said that it stops at the US border and it can enter the Iranian border. Therefore, the awareness at the international level, world level, to inform the public opinion that the whole humanity, the whole world are at in the same boat. If we do not consider this fact, which is a very simple fact, we cannot be in a position to defeat and contain this virus. Unfortunately, when the application of this unjust and illegal sanctions are continuing against several countries, this means that this simple reality is not being understood. So what is important is for everybody to do whatever it takes, whatever he or she can, to increase the awareness that it is not a political tool in the hands of certain countries to use against other countries. What is important at this juncture is for every country to put whatever they have as capacities together to contain this virus and to get rid of it. And the best thing that can be done is to move away from sanctions, move away from hatred that unfortunately has been going on for some centuries against some countries, and then work together, because as I said, we are in the same boat. Either we will win together or we will lose together. And common sense tells us that it's better to work towards winning such a fight. As I said, this pandemic is not the only problem that we are facing today. Environmental degradation is more or less the same problem that the humanity faces, and we have to bring all the forces available to every country together so that we can overcome these difficulties. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. Let me see if there's Ambassador Francisco Campbell. Yes, I see your screen on. Please.
Thank you very much. I think what you are doing in promoting awareness and the importance of the American people expressing their firm solidarity with peoples around the world who are suffering from the effects of the sanctions. I think it's very, very commendable, and I encourage you to continue with this kind of work. Our responsibility, of course, is to keep you fully informed, and we intend to do so. As Jerry pointed out, in the 1980s, I was here in Washington, and we were able to work together with the peoples of the United States, the various solidarity groups that in effect got Congress to assume a strong position against the Reagan administration counter-revolutionary war against Nicaragua. That was a very, very successful effort, and we are convinced that it helped to avoid greater war in Central America. With regards to the pandemic, Nicaragua is absolutely convinced that the international community must come together, must work together very closely in combating this pandemic that is doing so much harm to all of us. It is not the time for unilateral, aggressive action against countries, but rather it is time that together, in a strong spirit of solidarity, we work to combat what is the common enemy of mankind, the COVID-19 pandemic.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Campbell. Ask one of our next panelists to jump in. Or Omawale Clay, who is speaking for Zimbabwe today, also can jump in. All right.
Sarah.
Hello?
You know, yeah, I would just comment that, can you hear me?
Oh, yes, but turn on your
Can you hear
screen.
me?
Okay, good, good.
Good. Yeah, yeah. I would just simply add that the effort at solidarity that the Sanctions Kill campaign is undertaking is very instrumental in first educating people truthfully about what's going on. I think we cannot overemphasize the fact that here, particularly in the United States, there's a role for all of us to play, particularly in reaching out and putting pressure on our legislators to understand what's happening with these countries in terms of the role of the sanctions. One of the things that I think people have pointed out that this sanctions campaign responsibilities is to let people know that when the United States says they're targeting individuals and that the sanctions are not really harming the people of the country, this pandemic is an excellent example of, by targeting the country, it denies that country access to many of the trading relationships to get the supplies, chemicals, medicines that are absolutely needed. We saw that historically in Zimbabwe with the cholera epidemic, when in fact Zimbabwe, which had never really had cholera before, because of its lack of access to the chemicals to treat the sewage plants, actually had a cholera epidemic that was very fatalistic to a number of Zimbabweans. So I just encourage us to continue to do this work, to continue to do this kind of campaign work and spread the education to the people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Omawali. And let me just ask, I don't know if Carlos Ron, you're interested in jumping into the discussion here. And we have just a few minutes left. Aha, hello. Okay, thank you.
I share all the views of our my fellow panelists. I completely agree that in what they said. I would just stress that the last point because see, the thing is, the United States is getting away with issuing sanctions. I mean, this has become a policy that is accepted because it's been normalized. So in general terms, nobody is looked at differently in Congress if they propose at one point or another to sanction a country. There is a culture that allows this to happen. There's a culture that basically gives them a free pass. So raising awareness, of course, is vital. Spreading, the sharing with people what the consequences are, but there has to be a deep questioning of this logic. Why is it that today, still 2021? I mean, we're here, or to 2020. I mean, we're here, and we're in the middle of something as tragic as this pandemic, and there's still people defending the use of sanctions, lawmakers, politicians of all sorts, because there's not enough questioning. I think there has to be questioning and pressure, and that this pressure has also has to take forms of show, not just that it's criticism, but that there has to be a cost, whether it be an electoral cost or whether it be some sort of cost in the political sphere. But they have to understand, they have to realize that most of humanity is not in agreement with these atrocious acts, because these are policies that starve people. These are policies that destroy the economy of nations for years to come, and it really puts a lot of people, regardless of their political position or where they stand or anything, they affect whole populations. So the questioning, the raising awareness, yes. The doing these type of programs, of course. Talking to other groups, having a broad coalition, of course, is important. But we have to get deep into the questioning of this logic, of this culture. It cannot be accepted by any country in the world that this is a normal thing, that this is something acceptable for policy. Foreign policy cannot be based on illegality. That's why we have a multilateral system. That's why we agreed to United Nations. That's why we are all part of that. So we have to play by those rules. We have to accept diplomacy. We have to end this culture where something like coercive measures are acceptable as some, as foreign policy.
Thank you so much. And I think we're coming to the end of this program. I do want to ask everyone, remind them, and it is on the chat also going forward about signing the international letter, signing the sanctionskill.org pledge. That's sanctionskill.org/pledge. We will see you in 3 weeks on Sunday, that is May 31st at 4 p.m. Is there any other comments, ending comments that any of the representatives would want to make? And these are really closing comments that we very much value, because this is such an opportunity, and we will make sure that we make good use of very valuable educational material that you have provided here today. Any closing comments that the panelists or those who participated in the program today want to make? All right, I don't see any hands up, and so I will say at 5:57, we're just closing in. And from wherever you're watching in the world, it was quite amazing in the beginning of the chat as so many people signed on from countries all over the world and from all over the US. And from those who are watching on Facebook, those who are watching on the YouTube channel, and those who see us in streams as we go forward, that it is the actions of the grassroots movement that can be decisive if we are determined, if we're loud, if we're organized. And during a time when we're all told to stay safe and in place, safe means safe for the whole world. It means we cannot allow any country to be starved down in this sinister criminal way. So to everyone, we thank you very much for joining us today, and we do urge you to stay in touch with us and with each other. This is how a movement grows stronger, through unity and through solidarity.